Two recurring themes in this hugely important debate have been accountability and the changing landscape of international institutions and their response to these events. But in parenthesis, and before I make my own contribution to those themes, I'd like to ask in parenthesis the Noble Baroness, the Minister, when she comes to reply, to touch on something raised by the Noble Lord Owen and the Noble Lord Alderdice, and that's the gifting that this country has rightly made of munitions and armaments to Ukraine, but something that hasn't been referred to so far, and that is the replenishment of those gifts, which was raised during the debate in your Lordship's House on the report of the International Relations and Defence Select Committee. It's a hugely important question, and I look forward to hearing from the Noble Baroness about that. But I would like to start by just reminding the House what my noble and gallant friend said earlier on. He said, there has to be accountability for a gangster regime for unrestrained savagery. Even as we debate here today, functionaries and diplomats are meeting in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. But even the best of them must be shrugging their shoulders in despair at their own irrelevance, perhaps privately agreeing with the conclusion of a Wall Street Journal editorial on Tuesday that, and I quote, "The truth about today's world order lies in the rubble of Bakhmut." Undoubtedly, the failure of the UN to prevent the Kremlin's visceral brutality and to thwart its arms deals with countries like Iran and North Korea, enabled by Russia's veto in the Security Council with Chinese support, has left its credibility in tatters. Even its one significant achievement in brokering a deal to keep grain flowing from Ukraine was jettisoned by Putin in July. And perhaps the Noble Baroness, who did refer to this in her opening remarks, might enlarge on that and tell us what the current position is on those crucial supplies to countries where famine is no infrequent visitor. Just as the courage and refusal to buckle of President Zelensky has forced the West to reassess its failures to see the danger lurking in its own backyard, so perhaps that remarkable man, who also addressed the General Assembly this week, might wake us up to and those acquiescent nations to the dangers posed by an unravelling world order. In his remarks in New York, President Zelensky said that Russia has weaponized food, fossil fuels and nuclear energy. But he also warned about what he called shady dealings to try and concoct a deal legitimizing Russia's illegal seizure of the territories of a sovereign state. He warned, his words, evil cannot be trusted. Just ask Prigozhin. But he also insisted that for the first time in modern history, we have a real chance to end the aggression on the terms of the nation which was attacked, telling the UN smaller states this is a real chance for every nation to ensure that if aggression against your state happens, it will not end in the land being divided because of political or military pressure, but will result in its territory and its sovereignty being restored. My lords, these are questions which go right to the heart of the issues of the world order and the rule of law that we have been debating. I've got some specific questions for the Noble Baroness, the Minister, and about which I've given her notice. During his remarks this week, Mr. Zelensky referred to the plight of the kidnapped tens of thousands of Ukrainian children, referred to by my noble and gallant friend. He said, President Zelensky said, we have to stop it. What will happen to them? This, he said, is clearly a genocide. From the early months of the war, we've heard disturbing stories of Ukrainian children being abducted and taken to Russia and being subjected to accelerated illegal adoptions there. In August, at a UN Security Council session, Katerina Rashevska, a legal expert at the Regional Center for Human Rights, reported that Russian Federation agents had taken at least 19,546 children to Russia from Ukraine since the 18th of February 2022. Among other violations, Russian Federation citizenship is imposed on them and they're forbidden to speak and learn the Ukrainian language or preserve their Ukrainian identity. And my lords, this isn't the first time that Russia has targeted children. Similar practices were deployed back in 2014 with the so-called Train of Hope. The international community failed to address those crimes in 2014, and President Zelensky is right to demand that we do not do the same again. On the 17th of March, a pre-trial chamber of the International Criminal Court issued warrants for the arrest of Vladimir Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova, and I quote, for the war crime of unlawful deportation of population children and that of the unlawful transfer of population children from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. War crimes, my lords, not a rhetorical device, but an indictment. And it goes further. The International Criminal Court says there are reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova bear, their words, individual criminal responsibility for these crimes. This week, Mr. Zelensky said, never before has the mass kidnapping and deportation of children become a part of government policy, not until now. We know the names, he said, of tens of thousands of children. I have evidence on hundreds of thousands of other kidnapped children by Russia in the occupied territories of Ukraine and later deported. We are trying to get children back home, but time goes by. What will happen to them? Those children in Russia are taught to hate Ukraine, and all ties with their families are broken. And this is clearly a genocide when hatred is weaponized against one country. My lords, what can the Minister tell us about how this case can be progressed and what more can be done to assist Ukraine's children, especially those from orphanages and children who have been abducted to Russia to be subjected to illegal adoptions there? What practical assistance is being offered to Ukraine in this respect? Is there a clear strategy about how best to assist Ukraine, ensuring that Ukrainian children are reunited with their families and carers? When she comes to reply, my lords, I hope the Minister will also say a word or two about an issue raised by the Noble Baroness, Lady Kennedy of the Shores, and that's about sexual violence in Ukraine, where the evidence of rape and sexual violence in Putin's war is growing ever more as every day passes. Has the Noble Baroness seen the report published by the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, and the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, which provides graphic detail, harrowing details, which I won't repeat to the House today, but has the Noble Baroness seen that, and how are we responding? How will those responsible be brought to justice? What practical assistance is the government offering to victims and survivors of CRSV in Ukraine? How much of our own budget is assigned for this purpose? And what is the progress of delivering this assistance? And in this same search for accountability, what can the Noble Baroness say to us about progress being made to establish an ad hoc tribunal for the crime of aggression referred to by the Noble Baroness, Lady Kennedy, especially now that a mechanism to collect the evidence of the crime of aggression is actually up and running in The Hague? How is the UK supporting the work of the International Centre for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine, but also the work of Eurojust, now that the UK is out of the EU and Eurojust? The Noble Lord Harrington referred to Ukrainian refugees, and I pay tribute to the government for the way in which they have helped to organise the great response that the Noble Lord Owen touched on as well. But that took the work of the then Minister dealing with this, Lord Harrington, and others who have followed. But there are around 163,000 people who have been helped. What have we been doing to collect evidence and preserve evidence of Putin's crimes from refugees who have arrived in the UK under the Homes for Ukraine scheme? It's an issue I've raised previously on several occasions in the House and in correspondence with ministers. Testimonies of war crimes must be meticulously collected and preserved for the day the perpetrators face the Nuremberg moment. My lords, men have allegedly been found shot dead with their hands bound. Mass graves are said to contain the bodies of dozens of civilians. Such butchery must carry consequences. Olaf Scholz was right to describe it as, his words, terrible and horrifying. Emmanuel Macron described the evidence from Bucha as, his word, unbearable, and said the Russian authorities will have to answer for these crimes. Even in advance of that moment, that Nuremberg moment, what are we doing now to amend our law, especially the International Criminal Court Act, to ensure that those responsible for international crimes and who are not UK citizens or residents could be prosecuted by British courts, as has happened in Germany and underlined by Amal Clooney's recent success on the Yazidi genocide when she took a case to the German courts? How are we working or intending to work with the register of damage caused by the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, which was established in May at the Council of Europe summit in Reykjavik? This is an issue I raised during the course of the Economic Crime Bill, and I thank the government for having accepted the all-party amendment which I moved at that time. And Lord Sharp of Epsom helpfully responded to the amendment with a promise of secondary legislation this autumn to address the issue of sanctions evasion, including confiscating proceeds of sanctions evasion and repurposing them in Ukraine's reconstruction. What progress has been made on how this and how and when confiscated proceeds will be used to pay for the damage claimed through the register? Finally, my lords, on Tuesday, President Biden told the General Assembly that the world needs to stand up to naked aggression, that no country is safe if world leaders allow the country to be carved up. He rightly asserted that Russia alone bears responsibility for this terrible war in which an estimated 500,000 troops have been killed or wounded. US and European support for Ukraine has been crucial for its survival, but it must be intensified if Ukraine is to prevail. And in the US, as the Noble Lord Owen said, Republicans especially must withstand the Trumpian message of abandonment. In the US, there needs to be a strong bipartisan message. But if you want to stop China from invading Taiwan, then the best message you can send Xi Jinping is to see Putin defeated. And in Europe, my lords, Ukraine's fight is undoubtedly our fight as well. The noble Lord Owen said that appeasement never pays. Winston Churchill once said, if you feed the crocodiles, one day the crocodiles will come and feed on you.
Yeah.